a very good morning. This is Harry and Sam from the New Zealand Astrobiology Network and Richard Hall from Stonehenge Aotearoa here to talk about space and stars and what's happening out there. It's been quite a tremendous year last year. We had so many events and we had close encounters of planets. We had solstices, equinoxes that are coming again. And we hope that this year will be at least as good as last year in terms of astronomy and beautiful clear skies. Speaking of which, here in Wairarapa, we have some of the darkest skies there are around here in New Zealand. And we go there every night when we can, when it's clear sky, and we look at these amazing, amazing objects. What's in the sky this time of the year, Sam?
Well, there's a lot happening in the sky this time of the year. Probably the thing that dominates the sky is the Orion constellation, which is, every night when we are out there with the telescopes, that's normally the first thing we check. We have a look at Orion Nebula, which is this beautifully huge gas cloud. It's really, really bright. That's in the middle of Orion Nebula. It's just above the three distinctive stars that are in a row that are called Orion's belt. It's just above that. Some people call it the handle of the pot. Right in the middle of the handle is Orion Nebula, and if you can even see it with binoculars, if you have a look with binoculars, you'll see a really bright patch, and through telescope it really comes alive. You see all this interesting shapes and streams of gas, and of course there's four little stars right in the middle called the trapezium, and they look absolutely fantastic. And if our telescopes, we've been looking and they're quite big, so you can see Orion quite early in the evening, actually, just after the sun's gone down. And then throughout the evening it just gets brighter and brighter and bigger and bigger.
When he says the little stars in the trapezium, that's just looking at them from here. Those little stars in the trapezium are about 300,000 times brighter than the sun, so they're actually little monsters sitting in a nest, aren't they?
Yeah, well, and that whole area is what we call a stellar nursery. So there are stars being born, hundreds of stars being born in that group. They're popping into existence every few thousand years or so.
And what happens is that as the first stars to switch themselves on are these giant stars, which is like the ones in the trapezium, and the ultraviolet radiation from those stars causes the surrounding gas to glow, but it also compresses it. And so that you get further collapse of the cloud and new stars being formed in that shell around it. So stars are never born singly normally, they're normally born in clusters.
Well, of course, one of the interesting things about star formation is it has to be really cold, which is kind of the opposite to what stars are, because stars are really hot. Some of those big blue stars that are in the trapezium and Orion Nebula, they're up over 20,000 degrees on their surface temperature, and in their core they're burning at 15 million degrees, much like our sun is. So this horrendous temperature. But of course, to create that has to be really cold. It has to be down to within 30 degrees of absolute zero.
I think that's one of the most fascinating things I've learned about stars and how they form. It has to be so cold in order to produce something so hot. Why is that, Sam?
Well, it's just they just don't pop into existence. You can't just have any old gas cloud. There's a certain set of conditions you have to have for a star to form, and it has to be really cold. There has to be a reason for the gas to compress locally, and that could be a shock wave from a supernova. It could be some kind of wave passing through the cloud that just causes local contraction of the cloud, and then it sets off a chain of events that can lead to a star forming. It doesn't always, though. Sometimes they peter out.
What I think is also awesome is that if you have a telescope and you know where to look, you can actually see how stars evolve. So, for instance, if you start right there closer to home at the Magellaning Clouds, we can see a nebula, which is the biggest spider that we can see from here, from Earth with the telescope. It's called the Tarantula Nebula. You can imagine the name. It looks like a tarantula when you look at it through an eyepiece at night. And so that's a stellar nursery. And so you look at those stars, you look at those wispy clouds, and imagine these are places where stars are born. And then you go and you look at Orion Nebula, which is kind of like almost the next stage in the evolution of stars. And then we have a very good example of what happens to young stars in a cluster that is really, really close to Earth. And most of you know it as Matariki. It has very many names. Everyone around the world call it somehow. It's called Subaru. Those of you who have Subaru cars probably know it from there. It's called Kritika. It's called the chicken and the hen. Everyone gave it a name, and mostly it is known as the Pleiades, or M45, as astronomers like to classify and talk about their stars with numbers. Well, Seven Sisters, yeah, it's another one of the very famous names. Or Matariki in June here in New Zealand. And so that's an example of very, very young stars that now they formed and they're spreading apart. If you look at the trapezium, these are those 4 stars that are close together, but also they're very far away. How far away are they?
Most of them, which ones are you actually talking about?
The trapezium ones.
In the trapezium, they're about 1,300 light years away.
Yeah.
But
well, that's a long way away.
Yeah. The point to remember is that when we look up there at the night sky, we're only seeing the big bright stars. It's a bit like if you were standing on the African plain and you look out and you can see the elephants and the giraffes and that. But what you do is you miss the thousands of other creatures, the small creatures. And the fact is that most of the stars that we see in our night sky are giants at great distances from us. Rigel, for example, that bright star you were talking about earlier on, I can't remember exactly, but it's about 60,000 times brighter than the sun. But only sort of 1 in a million stars is that bright. But we see it because it's so bright, it shines over great distances. And then you were talking about the Seven Sisters. Well, yeah, there's maybe 7 that you can see, but the cluster itself contains several hundred stars. We just see the brighter ones.
Well, we see more if you look at it through a telescope.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is you talked about the life stages of the stars, and Tarantula Nebula is actually quite a special stellar nursery. That's got some of the largest stars known to astronomers. These stars are over 100 times the mass of the sun, which means they don't live long. They only live, some of them, less than 20 million years, which seems like an extraordinarily long amount of time, but it's only a flash in the history of the universe. Now, what happens, of course, is you start off with something like Tarantula or Orion Nebula with lots of gas and lots of stars being formed. And like Richard said, as those stars get formed, when they're new, they're hot, they're blasting radiation out, so they're pushing all that gas cloud away. Well, eventually, all of the gas cloud gets either used up into new stars or gets pushed away. And what you end up with is a cluster of stars, much like Pleiades. And then over time, that cluster dissipates. Those stars, they're only loosely held onto each other because they all got formed there. So a cluster is really just the remains of a stellar nursery, and then over time those stars wander away. And of course we see this where one of the closest clusters to Earth is right next door to Pleiades, which is Hyades, the central cluster of Taurus. And that is a cluster that's slowly disappearing, and those stars are getting further and further apart all the time. So in, I don't know, maybe 1 million years or so, those stars won't be a recognisable cluster anymore.
Also, the thing to remember is that our sun would have been born in a cluster too.
Totally. Well, they all are, yeah.
And its brothers and sisters are out there. And just of recent times, some astronomers think they've actually found one of our sisters, as it were, out there, because they've discovered a star which has got virtually the identical composition to that of the sun and has the same sort of age. And they're thinking, this.
Well, and of course that hunt's been going on for a long time, and it's been one of the sort of the holy grails of astronomers is to try and find the family of the sun. But you've got to remember the sun's 4.5 billion years old. It's done a heck of a lot of laps of the Milky Way. What? 9 laps, no more than that, 18 laps of the Milky Way, and in that time it is, of course, all of its siblings and stuff, they've wandered off to other places, happily with their own solar systems maybe. So it's incredibly hard to find, and you think in the Milky Way there's 200 billion stars, and we've only seen now there's 2.5 billion stars. So 2.5 billion of that 200 billion stars in the Milky Way, they're the only ones that we've actually got any data on, and that's far more than what we can see. We can only see with our naked eye. We can only see 6,700 around the world.
So half of them at one time.
Yeah, and actually, what the point Richard made about we can only really see the bright stars. That it's amazing. Across the universe, only 80% of all the stars are smaller than our sun. So these are puny little red dwarfs,
and you can't even see them at all without a telescope.
Well, we can't even see the nearest star to us, which is a red star. Was a red dwarf. Was it Proxima Centauri? Yeah, and it's 4.1 light years away. It's the nearest star to our sun, and we can't see it simply because it's a red dwarf. So there's all of these red dwarfs out there. And in fact, within the nearest 100 light years, there's 20,000 odd stars. Most of them are red dwarfs, which is quite.
A few of them, few stars we can see. Alpha Centauri would be one, and that's always an awesome, because unlike our sun, Alpha Centauri, which is a nearest star system, it consists of two stars similar to our own sun orbiting around each other.
It kept its sibling.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, imagine what it's like living on one of the planets around there. You don't have one sun, you have two,
Like living on Tatooine.
Yeah.
So the stars that we're looking at this time of the year are the stars that are towards the edge of our galaxy. And it looks like there are a lot of them in the sky because, I don't know, why does it look like there are more stars than other times of the year? Is it because they're distributed more in the side of the sky? Or because, in wintertime when you have the Milky Way, you have that milky, beautiful arch in the sky with billions of stars in it. But you can't resolve them. This is what we say in stargazing. If you resolve a star, means that you can see that particular star. So what is it with summertime that makes the sky so beautiful?
Well, I think it's because the Milky Way isn't as prominent. So you've got it running from Southern Cross to under Orion, sort of the Milky Way you can see easily. But you have a whole lot of bright stars which really stand out in that area. So you've got, the Southern Cross, you've got, Diamond Cross, False Cross, you've got Canis Major, you've got Orion, then Taurus, and of course Pleiades on that big line that kind of roughly follows the Milky Way. And it's and they're really easy to spot. They don't get lost in the star fields like you have with Sagittarius and Scorpius. When you look at those in winter, there's so many stars, and if you have a dark sky location, you kind of get lost in the star fields. Especially if you look in a telescope, you go, oh, there's that bright star. I'll have a look at that, and you look in the telescope, and suddenly there's 1,000 bright stars in the.
Of course, what you're doing then in the winter time, your gaze is towards galactic centre, right, where the vast majority. You're looking at all the big bright stars in that direction. Now, as we turn around, we're looking outwards more or less from the centre of the galaxy, right? And so the bright stars that are there, they really stand out and so on. But all the way through the year, you're going to get a different panorama of stars as we gradually turn in space. Yeah,
kind of changes about every 3 months or so, doesn't it? It's quite different.
So it makes you wonder why. Why bother? Why are we looking at these stars? They're so far away. Why should we care about it? But I think one of my favorite inventions about stars and technology that we have here on Earth from what we studied out there in the universe is the thermometer. So when you go to the doctor and the doctor uses a ear thermometer, it sticks it in your ear and takes the temperature. And I remember when I was a kid, we had a very clunky one that you had to put on their arm, and it was took 10 minutes to show you what the temperature was. Now, this invention, the ear thermometer, is an invention that was used first to measure the temperature of stars in infrared. I mean, that's fantastic. So you look at the stars and you say, wow, these are so cute, but there's so many other things that technology comes back here on Earth and helps us during our just daily life.
Well, of course, that's measuring the temperature of stars tells you a lot about the star. And you can actually measure the temperature of a star just simply by looking at it. And it's the colour. when you look in a telescope or something, you can see this colour of the stars. You can see Alpha Centauri is a little bit yellow. You can see the stars in Pleiades are a little bit blue. You can see Betelgeuse, which looks quite red. Aldebaran, which is in Taurus, is quite another red star. Now, those red stars, their surface temperature is pretty low. They're around 3,000 degrees, or just a little over. The yellow stars, they're up around 6,000 degrees, and those blue stars, they're approaching 20,000 degrees on their surface.
But you've got this huge variety of different types of stars. So we were talking a little bit earlier about Proxima, right? And the star in size is not actually that much bigger than the planet Jupiter. It's got a lot more mass, but in physical size it's not much bigger than Jupiter, right? And it's something like 20,000 times fainter than the Sun, okay? But on the other hand, the other star mentioned earlier on was Betelgeuse, right? Which is the big bright reddish star in Orion. Well, I tell you what, it's got about the same surface temperature as Proxima, but if you put it where the Sun is, we'd actually be inside it. It is that big.
Well, it would extend beyond Mars. It's such a mess. But of course, these stars are at different life cycles, and they're quite, Proxima is a red dwarf in what we call the main sequence. It's just happily burning hydrogen, whereas Betelgeuse is nearly dead. It's just about run out.
Let's take a small break and listen to some beautiful music of Rian Sheehan, my favorite composer here in New Zealand. And when we come back, we're going to talk about your next program that you're going to put on in January about Earth and your talk. This is Harry and Sam from the New Zealand Astrobiology Network and Richard Hall from Stonehenge Aotearoa, and this beautiful, beautiful morning where we can see the moon. If you go outside, you can totally see the moon, half moon. Richard, tell us about your upcoming talk.
Well, as many of you already know, Stonehenge at this time of the year is open 7 days a week. But in addition to that, the big thing that's changed is that we're now doing regular astronomy programs. Initially just on Friday and Saturday, but at the moment you're doing quite a few of them during the summer period, aren't you, Honey?
Yes.
Yeah, in the evening as well. And so you get the opportunity to go out and see some of these spectacular things that we're actually talking about. And so in addition to that, we're putting on a special presentation every month, at least one special presentation, about something that's in the sky, whatever. The first one is down to me to do, and it's on the 23rd of January. It's on a Saturday, and it starts at 7 o'clock, and we've called it This Island Earth, Our World in Space and Time. And I think this is something really stretches the imagination. You know, we look at our world and we're seeing it in this little tiny time frame of what's here, and also in space. And what I want to do is take you on a journey just to show you where the Earth is, all the other wonderful worlds that we're already discovering. You know, a few years ago, the only planets we knew of were around our own sun. We now know of thousands of planets around other stars. And out there amongst those worlds, just about anything we can imagine probably exists out there somewhere. So this is going to be an introduction to the evolution of our world through time and space. And I think you're going to come up, well, I won't going to say too much more about it now. We're going to be looking at we're going to bring a bit of general relativity into it, but don't worry, there's no maths in it, but it will be, I think, a bit mind-bending for you as well about this, what's the nature of this universe we're in. So that's what's coming up on the 23rd.
Are you give a test at the end?
Pardon?
Are you gonna give a test at the end?
No test.
Well, you've done a lot of work in the last couple of months on making displays, and you have these beautiful planets displays
Yeah, that's right. Because
at Stonehenge.
what we want to do here at Stonehenge is to create a science centre. I always say to people, what I always remember when I was a kid, my parents never had not much money, but Mum always used to find enough to put us kids on a train, take us down to Kensington, which is outside London, and take us to the museums there. And I can remember walking into the British Natural History Museum for the first time, and you're confronted by the skeleton of a diplodocus, which I'm told now is called Dippy. Right? That's the name of it, but Attenborough calls it anyway. But it's 97 feet long, and suddenly you realise as a kid, hey, there were dragons on this planet, and that sort of captured your imagination. And we want to build something like this out in the Wairarapa.
Our own dragons.
Where people of all ages can come out and explore the wonderful universe that we've got.
We better find a dragon.
Yeah, but also our own planet.
There is a dragon. It's the constellation Draco is a dragon.
Yes, that's right. Dragons are very
Star
important.
dragons.
Star dragons. Most stars are dragons because they're very, very nasty. You don't want to get very close to them.
Yeah, with dragons, of course, are real symbols of power, aren't they? You know, yeah. I'll say no more about that.
So, wonderful things await for us during this year in 2021, and from here, from Masterton, we want to wish everybody a happy new year because we didn't have the chance to, and we look forward to seeing you. We look forward to talking to you about stars and space and cosmos. And we are Harry and Sam from the New Zealand Astrobiology Network and Richard Hall from Stonehenge Aotearoa. And until next time, we wish you clear skies so that you can always see the stars and always remember that we are made from the same stardust as they are.